talking about the werewolf in the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe. This is pretty much how it's seen. This is the sort of the ravening creature who takes maidens and that sort of thing. The werewolf and the changing into a human being as a motif has existed in so many cultures and in so many different environments that it would be very difficult to cover it completely in a whole evening. You've got Norse berserkers changing into bears and things like that. So we're going to confine it down to a couple of centuries during the great witch hunts in Europe. This is the earliest literary werewolf I can find. This is Wagner the Werewolf, which was a penny dreadful in the mid-19th century. Fantastic illustration. You've got this that's inspired a Golden Age comic. That's 1940s, I would imagine that one. We've got this lovely illustration from a Dumas book, which explicitly has a werewolf standing there, actually standing up addressing this man. This is from a film that you probably all know. Anybody know the film? American Werewolf, of course, absolute classic, brilliant, brilliant film. And this is slightly more obscure, but really, really good. Has anyone seen this one? Brotherhood of the Wolf, yeah, well done. And it's at the bottom there. Has anybody not seen it? Oh, okay, I won't spoil it then. I won't spoil it. The bottom is a kind of a reveal, and it's an absolutely amazing French language film if you ever get to see it. It kind of involves the Beast of Gévaudan, which is about a century later than the time that we're going to be talking about tonight. But it's an absolutely superb film. And then there's this one. Anyone recognise that? Yes, Company of Wolves. A film I don't think it quite stands up to modern scrutiny quite as much, but certainly some very lovely fairy tale bits and absolutely superb makeup effects. So you can see that the concept of the werewolf has inspired an awful lot of fantastic art. And this. So yeah, this one was for my niece. She insisted, but what are you going to do? So, Sabine Baring-Gould pointed out in the 19th century that in north of Europe, the shape of a bear, and in Africa, the shape of a hyena were more often selected in preference. It was a mere matter of taste. The idea that people could change into animal shapes, it appears across the world, across cultures, and just the choice of animal depends on the environment. So we have things like, what's this? That's a tiger, yeah, a were-tiger, and you do get were-tigers. This is hyena, yeah, were-hyenas, you get were-hyena folklore in Africa. This one? A jackal, yeah. I wouldn't have got that one unless I'd researched it. I knew about jackals, I didn't know what jackals looked like. So, yep, so you do get were-jackals. And what is it that unites all of these creatures? Predators, yeah, they're all carnivores, they're all top-level predators, which is exactly why this is an intrinsically amusing concept. In Europe, there are slight exceptions. You get witches accused of being changed into cats, which are also top-level predators, even though they're titchy. But they get accused of being changed into hares as well. But the thought of a person changing into an animal which is not a top-level predator is unusual-ish in folklore, really. So we're looking at the top-level predators. What we look at with modern literary werewolves, I think, is probably the darkness inside the human soul. It's basically outsourcing your evil. It's a way of saying that it was Mr. Hyde instead of Dr. Jekyll. And those are the kind of motifs that we get. And it's also the kind of motifs that we get when we look at the 16th and 17th centuries, the kind of thing that we're going to look at this evening. Now, what does lycanthropy actually mean? If somebody said lycanthropy or accused someone of being a werewolf in our chosen era, the 16th and 17th centuries, what would that actually mean? Well, we're going to look at three areas. The first thing is lycanthropy as a medical condition, as actually a condition of mental health. We've got this from John Webster. It's something from the Duchess of Malfi that was written in 1614, and it's actually quite a bizarre little excerpt. The doctor says, and this is entirely a subplot, this isn't the point of the play at all, the doctor says, in those that are possessed with this condition, there overflows such melancholy humour that they imagine themselves to be transformed into wolves. They steal forth into churchyards in the dead of night and dig up dead bodies. As 2 nights since, the Duke, who is the person they're discussing in this play, about midnight in a lane behind St Mark's Church with the leg of a man upon his shoulder, and he howled fearfully. He said he was a wolf, only the difference was a wolf's skin was hairy on the outside, his on the inside. He bade them to take their swords, rip off his flesh, and try. Straight I was sent for, and having ministered to him, found his grace very well recovered. So to our eyes, that seems like a completely bizarre group of circumstances and situations to put together. There's a bloke who thinks he's a wolf, although he doesn't look like that to everybody outside. He insists that the hair of the wolf is on the inside of his skin, but it is still present. And he's walking down the street with a corpse leg over his shoulder. But having been looked after, tended to by the doctor, he gets better and returns to mental health. So you would think, wow, John Webster had a hell of an imagination. In actual fact, I found a lot of sources for the kinds of ideas around at the time. The first one is The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton, and that was a contemporary sort of psychiatric manual. They used the humoral model at that time, where you had the 4 humours which had to be in balance in order for people to be perfectly in health. And he said that lycanthropia, or wolf madness, is when men run around howling in graves and fields in the night, and they'll not be persuaded but that they are wolves or some such beasts. I should refer to it as a madness, as most do. Not all, it wasn't a completely uncontroversial diagnosis, but it was mainstreamish. So, you know, it wasn't just Robert Burton. They lie hid most part of the day and go abroad in the night barking, howling at graves and deserts. They usually have hollow eyes, scabbed legs and thighs, very dry and pale. So in a mainstream psychiatric textbook, someone is describing the symptoms and the kind of subjective reality of this person, what they think. Simon Goulart was a French doctor, and he spent a lot of time in Switzerland. And he wrote about a man who he had encountered. I've observed one of these melancholy lycanthropes, and he knew me well. Being one day troubled with his disease and meeting me, I retired apart, fearing that he should hurt me. So this guy was clearly behaving a bit strangely. It was something to be scared of. Having eyed me a little, he passed me, being followed by a troop of people. He carried upon his shoulders the whole thigh and leg of a dead man, just like the Duke and the Duchess of Malfi. Being carefully looked unto, cared for, he was cured of this disease. Meeting me another time, he asked me if I had not been afraid, when as he encountered me in such a place, which makes me think his memory was not hurt nor impaired. So this man was going through a lycanthropic attack, and even though his perceptions of what was reality at the time were disturbed, nonetheless he did have a correct memory. His perceptions, he identified Simon Goulart, and he remembered it well enough. So Simon Goulart gives a very lucid account there, really, of the different perceptions in the situation. Job Fincel, this is via Goulart, about something that happened which was a great deal more tragic. There was a countryman in Pavia in the year 1541 who thought himself to be a wolf, settled upon diverse men in the fields and slew some. In the end, with great difficulty, he was taken, and he did constantly affirm that he was a wolf. He absolutely insisted he was a wolf, having killed some men. And that he was a wolf between the skin and the flesh. Now, this idea is called verisimilis in Latin, and the idea is that somebody really has that sort of the soul part of a wolf, but that you can't see it, but the fur is there. So Goulart is quite judgmental here, and I think his judgment would probably accord with ours as well. Some barbarous and cruel wolves, in effect, desiring to try the truth of that, gave him many wounds upon the arms and legs. They eventually realised that they were in error, that man was actually suffering a psychotic episode, that he didn't have any fur growing on the inside at all, and that they had been the irresponsible ones trying out such a ridiculous theory. They killed him. He died. So he was committed to the surgeons to cure, but he died a few days later. So we can see those 3 really peculiar things in the Duchess of Malfi actually in contemporary non-fiction accounts. So we can see that lycanthropy was an excuse for kind of a transient psychotic episode. And this is an illustration by Louis Cranach, the elder, and it shows this quite well. There's a man there, he's taking a baby off in his mouth. But he's on all fours like a wolf, and he hasn't been portrayed as a wolf, he's been portrayed as a rather disarrayed man. So nobody is saying if somebody is suffering from lycanthropy as a mental condition that they actually change into a wolf. They're saying that they're a person who's suffering from a transient psychotic episode.